pedantic, and most of all, unsympathetic, and we've got to do something about it. And he said, well, look, that's a management issue. You should leave that with me. We'll progress it. So the answer is I didn't just ignore it. I actually had a word with the chief executive that this needs to be dealt with. And I've been a chairman of many companies, and the answer is it's not just a popularity contest. You have to say things if you're not happy and ask for things to be changed. And I said that to the chief executive.
Right. And maybe just one final question.
Yes, please.
Just on the position of the post office as a whole. Do you think they should have been and still be part of the process, or should they be withdrawn and removed from that completely?
They should be removed completely. It's pretty obvious. I think people talked about the culture. Well, you saw the notes from the postmaster directors, and I think it was said that I somehow invented it. They rang me on a Sunday and said, look, they'd mentioned it to me about 6 weeks before. They were clearly highly disturbed on the matter, and I said, look, the problem is that you're both being investigated by the post office. If you come out now, it's going to look as if you're conflicted. So should we just not get this behind us before we really pick it up? And in mid-January they'd had enough, so they rang me on a Sunday and said, this has got to be tackled, Henry. I said, what I will do is I will prepare a file note of all your comments tonight. I will send it to you. I want you to agree every single word in this file note before I send it off. And they both came back. Now, unfortunately, it's on my post office email account, but if you asked, you would see that correspondence took place. So this is not something that anyone can say, I invented and it was not agreed. I'm a stickler in that regard. So they agreed every single word in that. I sent it through to Nick Reed, and I said I want to discuss this at the next board meeting. And the problem was that Nick Reed sent a copy of it. I don't know if you've seen the correspondence. He sent a copy of it to the legal director, particularly, whom the two postmaster directors were saying had way too much power and was using it as an instrument. I can't remember what the phrase was. It wasn't an instrument of terror, but it was an instrument of some way of control. And it was an appalling thing to do. And of course, the two postmaster directors were absolutely appalled in terms of governance that was sent to the people that were being critical of. And that's why one of the postmasters, Saf Elliott, sent that absolutely stinging note to Nick Reed. If you thought my note of what they said to me was harsh, all the phrases that were made, the note to from Elliott to Reed was an absolute zinger. So it was bad governance, and it was really badly let down the postmaster directors. And I would say, actually, they've been very brave, these postmaster directors, coming out to say what they did, because actually, I did say to them, this could impact your business. People you could lose post offices. But they felt they ought to represent the views of the postmasters in the organisation, and they were prepared to do it. And I thought that was pretty brave. And I thought, therefore, for me to duck and not take on their cause would have been cowardice when they'd taken such a brave decision. So that's why. And I guessed it might end up almost certainly in me being fired. But I thought the important thing to do is to do the right thing, and that's why I did it. Because I didn't want to feel that I would act in a different way and show less bravery than the two men involved. I have to say they were still braver because, of course, they were going to lose money, business. They could lose money or business from it, which, of course, doesn't apply to me.
Mr. Guns.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Staunton, Mr. Lavery touched on it earlier, but some very serious allegations have been made, both by Mr. Creswell and by Mr. Tidswell, related to your conduct, and that an investigation is currently underway, of which you were informed in November. Can I just check, first of all, that you share those recollections that in November you were informed that you were being investigated for your behaviour and conduct?
Yes, there is an investigation. What there is, actually, is Mr. Reed fell out with his HR director, and she produced a speak-up document which was 80 pages thick. And within that, was one paragraph there about comments that I allegedly made. So this was an investigation not into me, this was an investigation made into the Chief Executive, Nick Reed. There's that one paragraph, and you could say actually it was about politically incorrect comments that are attributed to me, which I strenuously deny. This was not an investigation into me, this was an investigation based on the 80-page document prepared by the HR director.
So, okay, so you're obviously accepting. Oh, sorry. Obviously, you've made it clear that you disagree with the allegations, and you're obviously currently going through an investigation. Of course, I wouldn't expect you to comment on a live investigation into yourself. Can I just ask, have you been interviewed at this stage?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
About
only last week I wrote to the barrister giving her further comments. So the fact that somehow I've not cooperated with this investigation is totally wrong. The point of the call with the SID was that this 80-page document was actually taking a terrible toll on Nick Reed. He said, I'm not being supported by the board, and this is just bad news for me and my family. I'm going to resign tomorrow. I've just had enough.
Because I was about to say, the chair did ask the question earlier, Mr. Reed, had he ever considered resigning? He said no. You're saying in a conversation, verbal conversation, he had got to a point where he felt that maybe he was going to have to
The
step down.
80-page report, of course, alleges that from the HR director, not my words, that Nick was going to resign because he was unhappy with his pay. She's put that in this document.
Sure.
I'm absolutely positive.
Because you'll understand that the concern here is that we've had your comment, which I will come to initially, about obviously or your interpretation of your meeting with Miss Mumby. That has led to obviously communication between, via the newspapers, between yourself and the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, essentially, about your dismissal. We're now adding Mr. Reed into this story. You'll accept that for sub-postmasters and postmistresses across the country, this is starting to look like a complete and utter shambles. Absolutely. To be perfectly frank, it's probably the politest way I've been able to. People will be shocked I was that polite, but like an utter shambles in how this is looking. And now we've got another name in the ring here, and so this only produces more mud, more grey area. When actually, as again, what the point of this session is, and I appreciate your contrition in what you said earlier about the situation regarding sub-postmasters and postmistresses. That this will only add further delay, further lack of attention to the victims of this massive injustice in our criminal and civil sector of law. And so do you regret now that we're in this situation where we're having trial by media and an HR dispute by media, which seems also utterly new to me, when actually it's drawing attention away from the Mr. Bateses and others?
I couldn't agree with you more. This should all be about the postmasters and their families and how their lives have been wrecked. That's what all of this should be about, and nothing else. The rest is just flim-flam. I know we can talk about these issues, I don't want to play them down, but that's what this is all about, is the postmasters. So I don't disagree with you one bit.
And can I just quickly clarify one further thing? So obviously you're currently under investigation for allegations that you've said you claim is a paragraph in an 80-page document.
Yeah, paragraph 2.7.
Is your understanding that Mr. Reed is also under an investigation?
Indeed. Yes. He's investigation for this. This investigation is primarily into Nick Reed and the 80-page dossier.
Okay, so at the moment now we've got yourself as the former chairman, who was the current chairman at the time, being investigated. We've now got the CEO allegedly now under investigation as well. That's blown my. I was not expecting that answer. Okay, so we've got.
Wasn't that made plain to you, this investigation?
That's the first thing I've heard of Mr. Reed's alleged, and I will use that word, alleged investigation. But obviously you're claiming that, and I'll probably let the chair come back on that one because he's been here longer than me to make sure I don't cross the line. What I say.
That doesn't mean I'm less shocked.
They're shocked. Good. Okay.
Well,
Going back to very quickly the meeting with Miss Mumby, I suppose the question I have is, if you have taken the nod and the wink that you are to slow down compensation to sub-postmasters and postmistresses, to limp it into an election, if that is how you felt you were instructed, my question is two-part. A, why not speak up about it until after you've been released from office? And B, surely you would have felt the need to resign if you felt that the system was indeed working against you in this way, to take a stand and to call out what you thought was malpractice by those in Whitehall towards making sure that compensation was received. You'd understand that the fact this has come out after you've been dismissed just leads to thinking this is a bit of he said, she said.
Well, and that, of course, there's quite a lot of element to that. The point that I would make is that I said to Nick, we should not do anything to pull the lever on the inquiry, and because we couldn't, that would be against the law, and neither should we pull the lever in respect of compensation, and indeed I said we should increase it. But there was the lever for the biggest amount, which related to the Horizon investment, which I felt put under notice that actually we needed to just be doubly sure, triply sure that we were getting it right in respect of that investment.
And Mr. Staunton, obviously, we've heard again from witnesses earlier that one of the things that you're being investigated related to is you trying to shut down a whistleblowing investigation into yourself. Do you deny those accusations?
Yeah, let me just explain what happened. As I said, it was not the first time that Nick had threatened to resign, but I could clearly see he was under, and you'll see it's in this 80-page report, which is not my report, but he had said to me the same things in terms of his salary. So, but it's there in the document. But the key point was that I could see he was in a very pressurised position. This is a tougher job being CEO of the Post Office, I have to say, than all the other companies that I've chaired, just because of the myriad of problems that it has. So on top of this, he was being investigated on an 80-page dossier, and he was really quite upset about it. And I felt it was affecting his emotional and mental state. It was that serious. So he was not supported by the board. So I said to him, look, I will go and talk to the SID. I'm conflicted, but I will go and talk to the SID to see if we can, this myriad charge sheet, if we can just, Nick, you've got to face up to the big ones. But you know, he said, I'll be wiped out from the business for 4 weeks if we go on like that. So we'll just focus on the big ones, but that's a matter for Ben, our SID, to give us a view on. So I rang Ben. I said, look, this is a chief executive that I'm very worried about. This is some way of dealing with him. We've got to show him some support if we can actually. Because to extent, I thought the HR director was negotiating a better exit package. I mean, that was my assessment when I looked at some of the things that she was talking about. So, and I said that to Ben. So I said we should reduce the charge sheet on Nick to start with. We can come back to the others we feel is relevant, but this man just hasn't got the time or the inclination to deal with the full charge sheet. So can you just look at it? It needs to be. You're conflicted, Henry. I want the 4 lines on me. I'm very happy to talk about. I've completely rejected them. So this, as I say, this wasn't a big investigation into me. This was a big investigation into Nick, and I didn't realise you weren't aware of that.
You've certainly made news today, Mr. Staunton, I'm sure you've that. Mr. Tidswell informed us that, I think in response to Mr. Higginbottom, apologies if I got the wrong individual, maybe Miss Marston, that he felt, once he had personally informed you of the investigation of getting into you in November, that your behaviour had changed and effectively, I can't quote him perfectly, but had become more erratic and...
Yeah, I saw that.
I'd say, do you think that's a fair characterisation, or do you dispute that from Mr.
No,
Sides?
I completely dispute it. And I think that what happened was, as you'll see from the documentation, it was actually the whole thing did get a bit difficult once the postmasters got hold of me, and I wasn't prepared to duck it, but I did a file note and said, we've got to tackle this. At this point, things did get very difficult, and within 10 days, I'd left the company. So I think that was a far bigger issue. But I'm not an erratic. If I'd been an erratic individual when it comes to business, I wouldn't have been the chairman or deputy chairman or main board director of all these companies. That's just not how I am.
Mr. Staunton, I feel like there may be another drama, Mr. Reid and Mr. Staunton versus the post office, coming down the track at some stage in the future, because I'm not going to say, but what I would say is my honestly, I'm blown away. What I suppose I'm trying to get to the bottom of here is it right, really, in this myriad of mess? Should the politics and the politicians who have been embroiled in this or dragged into this, isn't it right that we really put these individuals to one side?
Absolutely.
And that they are no longer part of this discussion, and we can move on. And I mean the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, and just say that you're not interested in firing in her direction. And now this is about your fight with the Post Office to clear your name and reputation, for clarity to be brought around Mr. Reid now and what his current situation is with the Post Office, and whether or not he is under investigation or not, and whether he is wanting to resign, bearing in mind he also took the oath and said sorry Chair, isn't the point here now that Mr. Bates has got a point that maybe the Post Office needs to be buried and actually sold off, because he said it's such a mess, and the fact we've got the former chairman and the CEO apparently both are under investigation, and one particularly wants to resign, isn't it? Maybe is it time for the Post Office to go?
Well,
is Mr. Bates right?
That's a really good question, and what I said in January, again, it didn't find favour with UKGI. The only route through this, for me, is demutualisation of the Post Office. The answer is where I think the postmasters have a stake in the business, and I haven't got my mind right quite how we would have done it, but we cannot have the postmaster. This got nothing. The discussion should all be about the postmasters and justice for those who have been convicted, and we mustn't forget a reasonable living for those that work within the post office business now, which is actually not a sufficiently remunerated business. That's what this whole thing should be about, and so it shouldn't be about another TV program about Mr. Reeves. Sort of, it's a pointless waste of time. That doesn't actually further the cause of the postmasters one bit. So Mr. Bates is right. I'm not sure that Amazon is right. I think it would be more powerful if we had a demutualisation. That's why I wanted at least one more post office director on the board. My preference would be to have 2, and then we'd have 4 postmaster directors on the board, which would be the start of that journey. And I would have, you've seen in the file note, I would have 2 of them actually managing a committee that was all about the culture within this department. I would have one of them chairing the remuneration committee, because I think that would actually sort out some of the issues you raised about bonuses, backdating pay deals, putting multipliers on all the bonuses when they should only go to objectives, which I think you covered all. Because I think on the governance on REM is a really big point which you raised, because actually when we came to see you last time, we just talked about that TIS scheme. All the other issues about backdating of postmasters, applying the wrong multipliers to the wrong bonuses, all of those stuff was not covered at that meeting. So I think...
but you understand clearly, Mr. Staunton, I promised Chair last thing. You appreciate that with the former chairman, who was then the current chairman, and the CEO, now apparently both under investigation, sub-postmasters and postmasters are going to think they are literally bottom of the pile when it comes to them being focused on when the 2 most senior people in the organisation are at war with its employer.
Well, I wouldn't classify it as war. I mean, this was a complaint.
It's not harmony, Mr. Staunton.
Of course it's not. Of course. And actually, it doesn't further the cause of the postmaster. That is the key point about all of this, is that we need to get back to talking, and I think the committee covered it, but all sorts of other issues came to be involved, and I think we'll talk about the SID process, etc., which I'm very happy to do.
Yeah, sorry,
but it is mainly about the postmasters. That is why I went public in the Sunday Times article, and one of the problems, of course, if you go to the Sunday Times, is of course you lose control of the narrative to a certain extent, and the focus of the article became much more about government and not about the postmasters.
And I think it's fair to say that we've not
that was the
necessarily
heading, and it was also the thrust of the article. And but you lose.
But you've helped us fill out the picture today, Mr. Higginbotham.
Thank you, Chair. I actually want to stick on that theme about. I don't feel we've currently got the answers to everything.
I'm terribly sorry.
I don't think we've got the answers that we need as a committee yet about what happened. So I'm going to ask you some quite direct questions. I appreciate short, pithy answers if possible. We've currently got the Secretary of State, the Minister, the Senior Civil Servant, the Chief Executive, board members, other officials in the Department for Business and Trade, all saying that they wanted to expedite compensation claims. And Mr. Staunton, with due respect, you are the only person sat there saying anything to the contrary. Could it not be that you misinterpreted the conversation? And if you didn't, why, with all those conversations that must have taken place over the course of your tenure as chair, would you not confirm and clarify with anyone?
Yeah, well, I think that your committee itself, to talk about expediting compensation, that was not the view expressed by postmasters, that this process would be expedited. It was lamentably slow until Mr. Bates. It was lamentably slow, the 4% you've quoted. You know, this was not being expedited one bit.
But some of that included a period where HSS was the post office's responsibility.
Sorry?
Some of that was when HSS was under the post office as a responsibility, and you were the chairman.
Yes, well, I think that...
So did you fail in getting compensation out as chairman?
No, because I think we need to distinguish between the various schemes. My main gripe is with the overturned convictions and the lamentably slow process we've had there. I think I went back
to be fair, Mr. Staunton, that feels like a smoke and mirrors answer of don't look over here, I only want you to look at here.
Yeah. No, I'm very happy. I'm quite happy with the progress on HSS and the other schemes. I don't think it could have been faster, but it's not my biggest gripe. As chairman, I mean, the executives run compensation, and I thought it was the progress was adequate, as you had given back to you by Simon Recaldin. So I don't have a gripe with that, but I'd have a huge gripe with the fact that overturned convictions was so slow, and we were getting nowhere on exoneration. We were told it's not possible, and suddenly we had Mr. Bates, and all of a sudden exoneration was possible.
Which includes the period you were responsible for.
Sorry?
Which includes the period you were responsible for Post Office Limited, but
Yep.
You don't seem to want to accept that your organisation, when you were chair, was part of the problem.
Well, I think that I do think the post office was part of the problem, but I don't think the compensation for HSS, etc., could be considered slow. I mean, I think the postmasters made a point that it could have been faster, and I think that's a not unfair categorisation, but it wasn't slow. So I think as a chairman, if something is going wrong, the first person to deal with it should be the chief executive. If it's going terribly wrong, the chairman has to have a word with the chief executive and say, this is terribly wrong, we need to sort it. I didn't feel that the progress on HSS was terribly slow and therefore needed a chairman intervention.
In your introductory meeting with Ms. Mumby, you described it earlier on as so unusual as to warrant sending a note to yourself. At what point did you then raise what had been spoken to you about by Ms. Mumby with the Secretary of State or the Minister or another senior official?
Well, I raised it with Nick to say, actually, my assessment is, he asked me, what do you want me to do with it? And I said we should carry on full steam ahead with the inquiry and compensation. If we get feedback that we've either misspent public money or we were being too quick, I would take the consequences. So it was actually quite a brave decision on my part to take that decision.
But you made a decision not to raise it with Secretary of State, Minister, or indeed the official that you'd had the conversation with?
No, I think that I have to take action on the facts as I find them, and I took the action which was that we would not slow in those two areas.
So that meeting with Ms. Mumby was in January. On Thursday the 23rd of March in 2023, the Post Office Minister, Minister Hollinrake, made a statement to the House of Commons. I assume as chairman of the Post Office you would watch proceedings in Parliament, and he said, we certainly intend and expect to make payments much faster than that, referencing the August 2024 deadline. So you then heard, despite in January thinking things were confused, maybe the government was slow, and you heard the Minister make clear at the dispatch box that he wanted to do things quickly, Did you have a conversation with either the Minister or the Secretary of State or a DBT official after that point?
Because I'd said we should still go ahead in terms of our spend on the inquiry and compensation, other than legal fees on the inquiry, I was not uncomfortable with the decision we'd taken.
So no is the answer, Mr. Staunton?
No is the answer to what?
That you didn't have a conversation with ministers?
Oh, no, I didn't. No, I didn't have a minister.
Despite the fact that at the dispatch box of the House of Commons, ministers made very clear they wanted to accelerate payments.
Yes.
So even though you could see a discrepancy between
anything that accelerates payments is good for me.
Would you respect, Mr. Staunton?
Yeah, sure.
Even though you'd seen a discrepancy between what you thought you'd been told and what ministers were saying at the dispatch box, you still decided not to say anything to the only shareholder.
I was all for anything that accelerates payments to postmasters on any scheme, and particularly we now need it on overturned convictions. I'm supportive of. So when the minister said we're going to further accelerate payments, I was all in favour of it.
Yes, but the point is, Mr. Sullivan, you went on record and said the direct opposite, that you'd been told to delay payments. In July, at an urgent question, I think from the right honourable member who sat behind you, there was an urgent question about the high tea rising scandal, and Minister Hollinrake said again that they wanted to speed up compensation. So you had a conversation in January that you got one interpretation of. In March in the House of Commons it was made very clear that we wanted to proceed faster. In July it was made clear we wanted to proceed faster. Did you in July speak to the Secretary of State
No, I was
or
quite
Minister Hollinrake
no,
as the Postal Affairs
I was
Minister
quite-
or
I-
UK Government
I was-
Investments
I was
or
quite-
any senior official?
I was quite happy with speeding up. That was just fine by me.
I'm not asking
Don't
if you were
forget I
happy with it,
didn't-
Mr. Staunton.
I didn't.
I'm not asking if you were happy with it.
Yeah.
I'm asking whether you raised your concerns that you thought there was a view that compensation should be delayed.
The point I'm making is that having heard what Ms Mumby said, I decided that we should continue as they were. So I didn't have any concerns that we were not paying postmasters quickly enough. I didn't take my file note and wave it around all to the press. I just put it in my file and basically forgotten about it.
I mean, that's an interesting take, Mr. Staunton. So would you say as chairman of any board, if your primary shareholder gives you a steer on something, you would take the view that I should ignore it entirely?
I've done that on many occasions. I mean, the fact is that your job as chairman is to do the right thing by the company. I was constantly, as a chairman, being told by shareholders, we want you to do this and that. But in the end, I've always found that if you do what shareholders tell you in the corporate sense, and if it goes wrong, they never say, oh, we told you to do it. They say, why did you do something as silly as that? So I always think, as chairman, you should do what the right thing is, rather than just taking what a shareholder says and just
But the right
implement it.
thing never came close to you tendering your resignation.
No, I didn't think it was. No, I don't think it was a resignation issue. We were going to proceed in the morally right way to pay.
Is that because you were just in
compensation.
this for personal
Sorry?
financial benefit?
Sorry?
Were you just in this for personal financial benefit? Were you
personal financial
willing-
benefit. My pension is a considerable factor of what my post office salary is. I'm very fortunate to have that position. So I'm not in this for the Monday one jot.
What was your remuneration, Mr. Staunton?
My remuneration was 150,000, which is half of what I got on the other companies that I do for about 3 times the work. I mean, this is not a.
But you've heard how significant that is compared to the postmasters
There's no
and
question.
the sub-postmasters.
There's no question. I
Did you ever ask to see that increased?
No, never asked for an increase in salary. I wasn't in it for the money. I got a salary and I just left it at that.
Okay. It's very disappointing, Mr. Staunton. I'm still not convinced we've got a clear answer as to why you decided not to take your concerns to either the Secretary of State or the Minister responsible for the Post Office or Department for Business and Trade officials or UK Government Investments. And perhaps if you'd spoken to just one of them to raise some concerns, we could have a little bit more faith that you're not now conjecting this for for some kind of political expediency.
There's no political expedience in this for me. I'm just a businessman. But I had no concerns that we were going down the wrong track in terms of paying postmasters at a reasonable rate. If it came back to me and said you're proceeding too fast when they saw the checks, that would have been different. But I was perfectly comfortable with the position we were taking, which was we were going to carry on paying postmasters at a decent rate.
We're about to move into our 5th hour of hearings, but Mr. Lavery, do you want to... Mr. MacDonald?
Chair, this has been another unedifying process in Parliament, and Mr. Staunton, you've lifted the lid on what we already knew was a dysfunctional organisation. It's been taken to new heights today. And all the while, the people that we really care about, the postmasters and postmistresses, are still no further forward, and I don't suppose their confidence has been increased one jot by what they've heard today from anybody. But just as a final parting question from me, in all these circumstances, do you think it's incumbent now upon everybody else who's involved in this process to give some certainty to those postmasters and postmistresses to come up with legally binding dates by which they should be compensated?
Absolutely. And I think not only that, we actually need to review the cases that have been agreed, because there's no question from what I've read that postmasters have signed agreements where they've only taken a fraction of what they thought it was due just to get it out of the way. So it's a far bigger issue than you've raised in terms of dates. But we need to go back and get justice even for those that have agreed amounts. So it's way bigger than even you suggested, sir.
Mr. Higginbotham?
I just wanted to ask, as a chairman of the board, I assume you do evaluations of the executive team. How would you rate Mr. Reid's performance as chief executive?
Well, we do evaluations of the board, and in respect of Mr. Reid, I would say that it's a very tough job, as I've mentioned before, tougher job than any of the companies that I've talked about, because there's just so many strands to this deal. So I think he was doing fine. Huge pressures on him, and therefore, as I say, I must have had 4 conversations when he said he was going to chuck it in, and my job was just to be someone that would understand the pressures that he was on, and because I think it'd be very difficult to find a replacement at this stage with the business and the state that it's in. So I think if I didn't think he was doing satisfactorily, I'd have asked to change things.
Did you ever look to increase or decrease his remuneration package based on his performance on dealing with these legacy issues?
I'm not the chairman of the REMCO, but the answer is I got a strong message from Mr. Shapps when he was Secretary of State. Don't even think about coming for any salary increase. I got a strong message. I got a strong message from Minister Hollingrig.
Is that because you asked?
I said to him, Nick is unhappy with the salary. He said, "Don't waste a postage stamp coming to talk to me about it." So there's no.
But you did try to secure a pay rise for Mr.
Yeah,
Reid.
I did. I went to see him and said, "Look."
Despite some of the things we've heard about normal postmasters and sub-postmasters who were on £20,000 and below.
Yeah,
Did you not know that as chairman of the board?
Of course
There's
I did.
discrepancy between the person at the top and the person at the bottom. Did you not care?
Of course I care. There's an enormous discrepancy, as of course there is in any other commercial organisation, between the person on the shop floor and the chief executive. So of course I care. But I don't think we're that different from anywhere else. So, and don't forget, when I went to see Mr. Shapps, I'd only been in the organisation a month or two, so if that. So this wasn't one where, I had detailed issues about knowing that we had all these REM issues.
I'm not sure that's the get-out you're hoping for, Mr. Staunton, because if after a month, given all the problems we know about the post office, you decided to go and ask and lobby for a pay rise for the chief executive at the time, it does indicate you weren't sufficiently over the detail.
I was tremendously over the detail. As a chairman, I'm more involved in the detail than probably most of my colleagues who are chairman, because I'm an accountant. I just do that. But this was very early on in my discussions. It was a letter drafted by the HR director, which she'd agreed with Nick. But they said, "Look, will you go along and talk to the Secretary of State?" And I went with her. And the truth is, of course, I saw very quickly that it was a complete waste of time. Just as when Minister Hollingray wrote to us in April saying, "I'm just fed up with all these errors that are happening in the governance of REM," and I thought it was a very fair thing to write.
Well, look, that draws this panel to a conclusion. Thank you very much, Mr. Staunton, for your evidence this afternoon. You have stood by the assertions that you've made in the media that you came away from a meeting with a senior civil servant under the impression that an option was to slow down the pace of redress. You've told us that there isn't a hard ring fence around the money for compensation. That's certainly your understanding.
My understanding.
You've also given us some pretty bombshell revelations about a boardroom that is in some disarray, a chief executive who is under investigation, and a chief executive who has sought to resign, even though he has just told us on oath that he is not. So thank you very much indeed for the evidence to the committee.
Can I just say one thing, Mr. Chairman? Can I say one thing? That some
Please.
insinuations were raised about the SID process, with which I strongly disagree. I've appointed more SIDs than probably anyone that has been interviewed today by some margin, and I've acted absolutely scrupulously and fairly, so I didn't want that to pass.
No, well, thank you
if
for
you'd
putting
asked
that
me,
on
I
record.
could have given you chapter and verse. But
that concludes our panel. Order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.